Are you connecting all the dots on the journey to your inner wisdom? Are you looking for a fresh perspective on the messages you've been asking for?
So who doesn't want to be happier, healthier, wealthier, and wiser, and be able to make life's choices with confidence because they finally see the signs? We know you do.
I'm Angela Coulter.
And I'm Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
We're two conscious journeyers dedicated to turning over those rocks and helping you on your personal intuitive sleuthing mission of evolution in our multi-dimensional hologram.
And that includes Earth too.
Yes, it does. Welcome to Solving Me, our conscious puzzle-solving podcast, where we look at the natural relation between your life experiences and their meaning in the bigger picture, from the most mundane to the most overwhelming.
So what do we mean by all this? Well, have you ever thought that getting a flat tire and twisting your ankle could be related? And maybe a message about what's preventing you from getting that awesome, high-paying job you would love. Believe it or not, it's all connected.
Want to know more? Come on and let's get sleuthing. See what comes up in this episode, because it might just be about you. Today, for episode 25, we're talking about stress. Now, you might not think stress is a message, but it's a huge one, and many of us have it pervasive in our lives.
Some might say it's the mother of all messages.
Absolutely. Well, let's just start with what is stress? Stress is simply friction that's going on about when we experience stress in our bodies, it's because there are two things that don't align.
Exactly. It's that dissonance instead of resonance.
Mm-hmm. So it's something you want to do and something that is not allowing you to do what you want to do. Stress, right? Mm-hmm. Doing something too much and not enough of something else. Imbalances stress.
Yeah.
It's so big of a topic that it's challenging to cull it down into a 20-minute episode, but
right. Well, and a lot of going back to the episode a couple of weeks ago on fear is, fear is a great source of stress. And that is, going back to your example of something you want versus something you don't want.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The other day, I posted something about making choices, right? And what's interesting was I got a lot of people going, "Oh my God, you were speaking to me." But sometimes making a choice or a decision causes us a lot of stress because we have the friction between the heart and the mind, right? The logic and the feels.
Right.
And sometimes
the fear of what if it's the wrong decision?
Exactly. And see, so when you have these battles going on inside yourself, right? And that's always what causes stress, is when something is not aligned. So if you feel stressed, if you have headaches, right? So how does that physically manifest? Headaches, shoulder aches, muscle aches, back aches,
jaw tension.
Mm-hmm. Back to our teeth episode.
Right, teeth episode. Exactly. I can't sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yes, can't sleep. Getting angry very easily. You're very triggered very easily.
Overeating.
Undereating.
Yep.
And so
inability to focus.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so what happens is, think about all the things we just said. How many things that we just claim victimhood to be like, "Oh, I just have ADHD."
Right.
I was like, well, if you really look at how we define it today, I would say most of the world does.
Exactly. And there, even like functional medicine will define stress as something that creates physiological differences in your body that then make you more prone to different illnesses. Mm-hmm. And so, it's going back to the source. Reduce the stress and the illness goes away. Eliminate it. Yeah.
And again, imbalances, creates imbalances too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg, the stress or the imbalance? But it's really the same. So if you're feeling stressed in your life, first thing for you to do is to step back and say, what is unaligned in my heart?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it takes a little bit of digging because we get really triggered at ourselves. Like, what do we say? Oh, that's ridiculous.
Well, it can't be this, can't be that. I've already looked at that.
Yeah. Or
But
I'm
but
fine. I'm fine.
chances are stress was not the first message.
No.
It began as something quieter, smaller, just inconvenient, and then began to grow and escalate and encompass more and more and become more and more apparent.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at it from that perspective, if you have a lot of evidence of the stress, might be easier to unravel.
Yes. So if we look at, let's look at what a lot of people talk about. Well, I just have so much on my plate. I'm just stressed all the time. And when you
That's good.
say, and when you say, as we all say, do you meditate? Do you take a
I don't
breath?
have time.
I don't have time. I would love to, but I don't have time.
Or I
So,
can't quiet my mind.
yeah, right. Oh, I just can't meditate. I've tried all these different ways and I can't do it. Claiming victimhood.
Yep.
And think about, so one of our biggest causers of stress is the ego.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise! Because the ego tries to make decisions based on what it knows and it hates what it doesn't know.
And we'll avoid it at great lengths.
Yes. If it's unknown, it takes lowest priority versus if it's known, I can manage that. I can control it. So it thinks. And so often what starts to happen, going back to the decision thing, is if our heart starts pulling if our consciousness starts pulling us in a certain direction and it's an unknown direction and the ego goes, oh no, this isn't safe because it's unknown. Okay, going back to the fear episode, fear of
Right?
the unknown.
Yes.
I would rather have the evil I know than the evil I don't, right? How many times have you heard that?
Yeah, more than I can count.
Yeah. And so then you have friction that goes on inside of you, right? And fear is one of the biggest stressors, like you said, because especially when we put ourselves in that place of facing it.
Right. Because the first thing the ego wants to do is, okay, how do I control this? Because that's the best way to mitigate my fear.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, control has to do with putting things in a box that might not fit into a box.
Right.
So when somebody is running around like, like in a frenzy all the time, it's what is causing the stress, right? The stress is typically you're overloading yourself with something that does not align with you. Okay. Now, there are other things like they talk about psychological stressors, like things like big changes, right? Like marriage, divorce, death, birth,
Birth,
new jobs,
new
new
house, moving.
moving, all that kind of stuff. And so when we talk about that, it's simply change. It's this fear of change often. It's the discomfort of, again, fear of the unknown because it's something new and different. And so the ego is fighting to maintain its box that it knows when you're moving outside of the box, regardless. Right. So there's the
Yeah,
friction.
absolutely.
I don't know this, right? I don't know this. I can fail at it. I can do a terrible job at it, whatever it is. It's lonely, it's sad, I'm afraid because outside of the box I'm lonely, right? So think when you're moving, changing jobs, like divorce or whatever, death, it's releasing something that had somebody had, or something that had been in your reality, right? So when you have that stress, which of course then we tie that to grief and mourning, right?
Right.
And all kinds of other energies. So we have this stuff that's constantly going on, and the lack of authenticity that we've been taught to have
Just just reinforces all of this.
and that's not said with judgment. It's just where we've like, and when I say lack of authenticity, I talk about things like, oh, be polite, like sacrifice yourself for others to make yourself to be a good person. Do this for this person, do this for these people, do this for your kids, do this for your spouse, do it for everybody but yourself, right?
Mhm.
Or, oh, if you want these are a lot of these old paradigms. Oh, if you want to be able to, have a good life, have a good retirement, then you got to have having money. You got to have a job that pays the bills, and that's never fun. You do your job, and then you go home, and then you have fun at home, but that you can't mix the two. That causes a lot of stress in our
Right.
bodies too.
Right.
And so this stuff is inauthentic. That's the inauthenticity I'm talking about. Like, because think about all the things that I have to hold, I have to create airs because I have to look this way, I have to present this way, I have to be this kind of person, and that might not be resonant. Again, going back to what we originally said, is basically whenever we have friction with the authenticity inside us and what we're not doing in that authenticity.
Right. It's that mismatch.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, this takes a lot of, I don't know, not unfortunately, but unfortunately it can take a lot of self inquiry before we really get to the bottom of it, because we do have it buried under so many layers.
Right. And the more you have conversations with yourself and begin to know who you are, the easier and the more automatic the process becomes of identifying, okay, what is that message? Or even simply identifying that I am under stress. A lot of times people are so divorced from how they are moving through their day. It's autopilot, and they don't even realize when and where they're experiencing the stress.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The autopilot thing that's when, if you want to jump back to our music episode, the frequency might hit you in the ear one day.
Because it's all connected.
That's right. But there's so many, so you might ask, if there's so many layers and it's hard to see, how do I even start deciphering this message? Right. So for me, what comes to me is, think of where you feel the most yourself, the most at ease, the most relaxed, and start from there. Right. Because that's typically relaxation and peace is a symptom of alignment.
Right.
So if you say, well, I only feel like I'm at peace at the ocean, okay, we'll start there. Well, why? And start asking yourself why. Why don't I feel like I can hold that energy when I'm not there or not in that situation? Because what typically happens when we look at it honestly is we start seeing, well, then when I go back home or I go whatever, then I have to act this way. I have to tend to this. I have all these things on my plate. And it's like, well, what if you didn't?
Well, and that's when, I was listening to what you said, then all those ego words start getting inserted. I have to, I must, I can't, I shouldn't. Those are all those ego words that means the ego begins to then try to reassert control over what you do, think, feel, all of you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's so subtle. Like, we're so used to it that we don't even register that that's going on, because that's how we run. And that's what I mean when we talk about that inauthenticity and that friction, the inner friction that happens. So that's the place to start. If you're feeling stressed and something is unaligned with your authentic self, And it's a big message that's the message basically is you're just unaligned. So the key
Right.
is, I mean, that's one simple message, but it's so many layers of other things that go on.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely.
So you have to ask, well, what am I feeling stressed about? And the key is that it's for us to commit to non-judgment within
Right.
ourselves.
Yes. It's and getting to that place where you can eventually have gratitude for, oh, if it hadn't shown up this way, I might not have seen it. So
Mhm.
I'm grateful to be able to get to the bottom of this. So I can then lose that stress.
Right. But also non-judgment on um we have so many things about like how we judge ourselves based on what we think we're supposed to be like, right? So that's
Right.
why, I act a certain way, or I sacrifice myself for my kids or my spouse or my friends or whatever, or I do this or I do that. And we have a really hard time coming to that place of accepting that that's inauthentic to us, because then we believe that makes us a bad person.
Right.
And that's
Right.
judgment.
Right. I've worked hard to get to the place of, well, that was then, but right now this is what is.
Yes. And the presence is always the key. The presence in right now.
Absolutely.
That takes us out of the but. It's just, where are you right now? Like, because by the way, we change our authenticity in every moment. We change what we know as our authenticity in every moment. And so that's going to be a moving target anyway.
Yes.
And the importance of coming into the alignment, coming into the flow, not living in stress is that presence of what are you right now? Where are
In
you
the
right
moment.
now? Mhm.
Yes.
And I know that sounds really simple and it takes a lot of commitment.
Well, books have been written, The Power of Now.
Mhm. Well, one of the best, one of the golden ones, yeah, for sure. But I remember years ago when I first read that, I got it, in my head, but I didn't get it till years later. And then I was like, oh yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So
And
take,
and that truth keeps changing too as we grow, evolve, adapt, align. It all just flows and is very fluid.
exactly. So how we perceive our stress, that's the key, right? So let's talk about this. We only have a couple minutes left, but so say we have something we're doing and it's not aligned with who we are and we really would like to do something else. And we know when I'm doing that something else, I never feel like it's work. I always feel like it's fun and fluid and I could do it 24/7 and do it till I drop and then still get up the next day and do it again, because I just love and feel so natural and naturally aligned in that. And many don't even know what that is, right? So because we have all these other things based on these expectations, and that's what causes the stress, because now we're doing things based on the expectation of what it's supposed to be, the expectation of what it's supposed to make us. And I'll tell you, one of my biggest stressors was the fact that I grew up believing I had to break the glass ceiling in corporate and that I wanted this kind of life, and the marriage and the 2.5 kids and the dog and the white picket fence, and it had to be this, and this is what it had to look like. And I almost killed myself in corporate doing that. And I was very successful, and yet my body said, you are not aligned with who you are.
To the point where you couldn't listen. You couldn't not listen.
Yes. And that's when I left corporate and started my own business and have gone down a different path entirely, but also found who I really was. And I'm grateful to that experience before, because it gave me some really important lessons, but it caused a lot of friction and stress in my body. I used to get migraines all the time.
Yep.
I used to be tired all the time, right? I would go through big yo-yo cycles of weight gain and weight loss and weight gain and weight loss, and it was just stress in the body. And I was always on edge. I was always doing things like, oh, having a glass of wine when I got home from work, because that was the only thing that calmed me down.
Mm-hmm.
Unalignment and friction, because it just wasn't my vibe. And I found my vibe later, even though it's a completely different way of thinking. And it's having my own, it's doing what my heart wants to do in terms of my business and my living and whatever, versus what my head said I was supposed to do.
Yep. Yeah, it's allowing everything to be in support, not in compromise.
Exactly. So start doing that little digging, because that might take a little bit.
I would say so.
Yeah. And be honest with yourself. Commit to honesty and authenticity with yourself, even if nobody else, you don't need to share this with anybody else. It's something you can journal about, something you can reflect on. If you're feeling stress, it's a message to say, where am I not being my whole authentic self? And that's where you start.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to us on Solving Me. If you found this podcast helpful, make sure to subscribe so you get notice every time we post a new episode.
And for a short time, we have a special bonus for you. Go to solvingme.net to download your free ebook, which outlines the next level of conscious solutions for your inner investigation.
Be sure to help us spread the word. Share us with others you know who want to solve the puzzles of their everyday life through the filter of expanded consciousness, and have fun doing it.
One more thing. Do you have some puzzling life circumstances where you feel blocked and you'd like our take on what's going on? Send us your conscious puzzle at connect@solvingme.net, and maybe you'll be the topic of a future episode.
Until next time, happy sleuthing.